everyone, I hope you're doing great. Welcome to my channel, I'm Leah from Koba.Siani. Let's talk about my new sewing project, which is this hacked Leah dress. As you can see, it's again medieval inspired as the last one, this here. And it's again with sleeves, but not the original ones, and a hacked neckline. In general, this sewing project was part of the Sew Beyond Bed and Breakfast sewing challenge on Instagram, which was hosted in April by Leah from My Superpower. I link her channel below. And for this challenge, the participants should sew a piece of clothing or an accessory or something out of old bed sheets or tablecloths or napkins or something, and upcycle them into something you would use. As I've got really tons of white old bed sheets at home, I decided again to use old bed sheets for a medieval Leah dress and to dye it with natural dyes. So this time I made the dye bath out of rosemary. Very interesting. The color is also very unexpected. I rather expected something in the grey or like violet direction, but as you can see it got green. But this was a nice surprise. But this time I've decided to sew up the dress first and then dye the ready garment. Pattern wise, I've used the sleeve number 2 from the Leah sleeve add-on pattern, but I've changed it into a short sleeve with a cuff like this here, and I've added an embroidery to hold the cuff. Then I've also changed the neckline into a square neckline, which I really like. And again, I've made the dress floor length, like the other medieval Leah dress. So in this video, I'll talk about the dyeing process, how I've changed the pattern, and also how I've done this embroidery as a super beginner. Up to now, embroidery hasn't been my business really, but for this dress, I wanted to try it out. And I guess you cannot see this properly, but I've already planned another embroidery here along the neckline. I've already drawn it on, because I think the dress is a little bit too naked here in this area. Later this week, I will also take some really cute pictures. I've already assembled a nice elven outfit for this dress. And I'm very curious how these photos will come out, because again, my friend Bärbel will take them, who is a professional photographer. So I guess these will be super awesome. Right now, at the moment, these photos don't exist, but I'll cut them later into the video and you will see them right now. It was so much fun and I love the photos. For the first time also, I've worn my pointed plastic ears. It looks so cute, like from another world. Okay, just quickly some technical infos before we start into the sewing project. As always, the pattern for the Leah dress and the sleeve add-on are available in my shops. The links you will find below in the description box. If you like to, you can also subscribe to my English newsletter, which comes monthly. This link you will also find below there. Okay, now I guess we're ready to start into the project. Have fun! So let's have a look on the pattern hack of the neckline at first. For this, I've copied my front pattern piece so that I could keep the original one and make the alterations on the copy. The back pattern pieces, by the way, remain untouched. As you can see, this clip is really very bad because you cannot see the whole neckline, so I'll explain the neckline alterations on a sketch. For the following step, our reference point is the highest shoulder point, and as the Leah pattern is already with seam allowances, this point lies within the pattern 1 centimeter away from each edge. From this crossing point of the seam lines, I measured downwards for 17 centimeter. And as I'm working on a small size, this can be more, of course, the bigger the size is, but only a few millimeters more precise because the grading for the front drop is not that strong. And of course, you can measure more in general if you'd like to have a deeper neckline. Then you draw there a line in a right angle to the center front. Then we need this point here, where the shoulder seam line meets the outline of the pattern. From this point, you draw a line to the lower line
And the angle between those two lines can be a little bit more than 90 degrees. So this new line is tilted a little bit to the right. And that's already the new neckline. Now we have to take care of the new front neck facing. The lower edge or the outer edge of the facing is now drawn in 5 cm parallel to the neckline edge. This is the red line here. Because of the shoulder seam allowance, the line is here not really straight but a little bit angled, just like it is at the corner of the pattern here. To create the paper pattern piece for the facing, it's now copied onto a new piece of paper. And for this, I'm pinning a piece of paper underneath my pattern now. And to copy the outline along the center front, the neckline and the shoulder, I can just cut the paper. To copy the facing edge within the pattern, you can either use this old school copy wheel or you can transfer this line at the window, which you can use like a big light box. I'm reusing an old printed pattern here, so my pattern is full of lines and I really have to concentrate to get the right one here. When this is done, the facing is ready and can be cut. Also, don't forget to label your new pattern pieces so that you don't get confused later. Then I could cut all the pattern pieces out of the bedsheet. As the dress should be long again, the front and back skirt pattern pieces, as well as the center front pattern piece, should be cut 30 cm longer. But this is something I do on the go. For the sleeve hack, there's also no real paper pattern hack necessary. I'm just cutting the sleeves number 2 with only half the length. As you can see it here, I've just folded up the hem upwards to the armpit. At this point, I didn't know yet how to do the sleeves exactly, but for the cuffs, which I've decided later, this length here was just perfect. Now to the sewing in general. I've used for this dress a sewing thread in cotton so that it would absorb the color later in the same way as the cotton material of the fabric. This is especially important for all visible seams. In my overlock sewing machine, I've used a light gray thread because I was expecting a grayish color, but although it came out totally different, this was okay. The sewing itself is of course the same as for the standard Leah, so I'm linking you here the sewing video for the Leah dress, and after this link comes the link for a Leah dress with sleeves. There are only a few steps which look different, and these steps I'm showing you now. At first, we'll have a look on the neckline. Here I'm preparing the neckline facings. Means the edges are already overcasted as described in the sewing instructions, the shoulders are closed, and here I'm finishing the lower edge of the facing. Then the facing is pinned right side to the main fabric and can be sewn with 1 cm seam allowance along the neckline. To help you with the corners here, you can draw on the seam lines at first. This helps to get it symmetrically. Of course, the seam allowance has to be trimmed afterwards, and it has to be clipped along the back neckline as usual, but as in the front there are only straight lines, only 2 points have to be clipped. And these 2 are here in the corner. This is how it looks like. The incisions go almost up to the seam, but without really cutting into the seam. Like this, the facing can be easily turned over to the inside of the dress. If you notice that the fabric pulls in the corners of the neckline, you probably haven't cut deep enough, but there's still time to correct this. Then I stitched again along the neckline and was totally happy with the shape. Next thing to check were the sleeves, and for this I've finished the dress almost entirely. Only the sleeve hem was still a raw edge. During the fitting, I realized that I would make cuffed sleeves, and I had enough fabric to turn up the sleeve hems twice by 6 cm. With this sleeve shape, I was quite satisfied. Now, I only wanted to improve the workmanship. It is logic that if you fold over your fabric twice for the cuffs, the overlock seams are visible. To prevent this, I wanted to add some bindings, which go 20 cm up the fabric edge. And for these I've cut bias tapes out of my fabric with the dimensions of 3 by around 25 cm. I marked the 20 cm above the sleeve and at the sleeve seams, and then I stitched on the bias tapes from behind, and as you can see it, I also folded the upper edge of the bias binding a little bit to the wrong fabric side of the binding. Now the right side of the binding is laying on the wrong side of the fabric of the seam allowance. Now the binding is stitched on with around 7mm seam allowance. Afterwards, this seam can be pressed. The open edge of the bias binding can be folded inwards towards their wrong fabric side for around 7mm and then wrapped around the edge of the seam allowance, now also covering the overlock seam. Like this, I'm pinning them in place and later fixing them with a stitching. Be careful here please to only stitch through the binding fabric and the seam allowance fabric, not the sleeve. Otherwise you will have some pleats in your sleeve later. At last, I've just overcasted the sleeve hem all around to prevent it from fraying, but this fabric edge won't be visible later anyways. Okay, so these were the sewing steps. Now off to the next chapter, the dyeing process. I admit I had another fit check and I was really happy with the dress. For the dyeing process, I had to undo the cuffs and also take out the ties so that the fabric could move freely in the dye bath. Before you start anything, dye or mordant, your fabric has to be really very clean. So at first I washed the dress again and let it dry. Then came the mordant bath. I always do this with a soy milk and water mixture, and this prepares the fabric for the colors. For the details about the mordant, I link you here the video for the other medieval dress. There I'm explaining everything in detail. Then I prepared my dye bath. For this I've cut my rosemary branches in small pieces and weighed the material. The branches had been cut off the bush a few months earlier. That means they were already totally dry. The thicker wooden parts I didn't use for the dye bath, only the parts with the leaves on. As I couldn't find any information online about the ratio of dry fabric and dye material, I just went all in and used my whole rosemary. So in my experiment here, the rosemary material weighed around 350 grams and my dress had a dry weight of around 500 grams. Next, the rosemary went into a big pot and then I covered it with water. At first it floated the whole time on the water, so I had to weigh it down with another pot. But then finally the rosemary soaked the water and sank down. I've let simmer the rosemary water for around 1 hour and let it also soak overnight until the next morning I've strained the rosemary from the water. After having soaked my dress again for around 30 minutes in water to prepare the fibers for the dye bath, I pressed out the water gently and then finally it was time to put the dress in the dye bath. Again, I've let it simmer for around 1 hour and also let it sit in the dye bath overnight. And of course, I had to stir it regularly. Although my pot is already quite big, it is in fact not big enough for bigger amounts of fabric. And again, this dress was a little bit too much fabric for my pot. So although I've stirred it regularly, it had not enough space to float around in the dye bath. So the color got a little bit irregular. But that was okay for me. I guess one time I have to get myself a bigger pot. After a few minutes, you could already see that the color would be some kind of green. This was really surprising for me. The next day, I've rinsed the dress in water and let it dry for the next step, which would be the embroidery. Here you can also see now the dyed fabric in a dry state, a nice light green. At first, I folded and ironed the cuffs upwards twice for 6 centimeters and I fixed this with safety pins. So the plan with the embroidery was that this element should hold up the cuffs. I had looked up some embroidery techniques online on YouTube and I felt quite confident to make the embroidery spontaneously. I was quite wrong. I've realized very quickly that this is really beyond my capabilities. So I've decided to undo the stitches which I've already done, to concentrate on only 4 different kind of embroidery stitches, which would result in one kind of flower only, in leaves and stems, and to draw on everything at first. Here I'm determining roughly the dimensions of the embroidery with the sleeve center, the pin here as an orientation, and then I could draw on the exact embroidery. How to draw on the elements exactly, you will better understand later when I will show you the stitches. Okay, so let's make the flowers first. The petals should be in blue, and for all embroidery elements I'm doing here, I'm only using 3 strands of the embroidery thread. This means I've split it in half. Next I've placed a knot at the end of the thread, and here I'm starting. Safe to say that I'm an absolute beginner. I even forgot to put the fabric into an embroidery loop at first. Also, up to now, I don't own a real loop. I just have a tiny one from my old sewing machine, but perhaps I'll invest in a real embroidery loop soon. So here's the stitch. It starts at the center of the flower, coming from the wrong side of the fabric, and then you go back into the fabric at the same place. Then there's this loop here. Don't pull now until the loop is gone. Then you come back to the right fabric side at the tip of the petal. And here you make a small stitch which holds the loop in place, so that each loop you make forms a petal of the flower. You shouldn't pull too much because otherwise the loops get too narrow and don't look that nice. This is a mistake I've made multiple times. It just needs a little bit practicing. For each flower I'm making 5 petals. This is also how I've drawn on the flowers. Okay, so now after 1 petal in real-time speed, I'm speeding up the rest of the clip so that you can see how I've finished the flower. When the first flower is completed, you just stitch into the next flower in the center and continue with this one. This means that the flowers are connected with the embroidery thread at the wrong side of the fabric. Just continue until the thread is used up. When this was the case, I just knotted the thread a few times and led it a few times through my embroidery backing. So hopefully like this the embroidery is secured. Then I wanted to make small yellow dots in the center of each flower. This is now made out of another embroidery stitch. So again I've splitted my yarn, knotted the end, and here comes now this new stitch in yellow. Again it is started from behind the fabric. Then you take the thread, wrap it twice around your needle. Take care here that you are quite near to the fabric, and then you stitch back into the fabric at the center of the flower and pull the thread through. Like this you can make beautiful small knot stitches, just perfect for the flower centers. Again I'm just guiding the thread to the next flower and only knotting the thread when all flowers have their yellow center. Means there is also a yellow thread interconnection between the flowers now at the back of the embroidery. Now come the leaves. For these you need the outline marked, of course, but also the center leaf rib, and here you will see why. I'm starting from behind again at the top tip of the leaf and then making 1 stitch downwards at the leaf center. This stitch is around 5 mm long. Then you stitch back to the right fabric side, perhaps a millimeter away from the first stitch. Then down again through the fabric, again a millimeter below the first stitch. Then the stitch is repeated for the other side of the leaf, and the second row of stitches are directly meeting at the center of the leaf. These stitches are then repeated, and with each row of stitches, or each pair, you move around 1 millimeter downwards until the leaf form is filled. If you notice a gap between 2 stitches, you can always come back and fill up this gap with an additional stitch. According to the leaf outlines, the stitches get smaller at the bottom of the leaf. Then you can continue with the next leaf, or you can embroider already some stems, which I was doing, for an optimal usage of the green yarn. For the stem, again, I start from behind the fabric, right at the bottom of the leaf. Then I'm making 1 stitch forward, which is perhaps 3 or 4 mm long. and then 1 stitch backwards, which is half the length of the longer stitch before, means perhaps 1.5 or 2 millimeter long. This is the only stitch I've learned actually from an experienced person, an elderly neighbor back then in my childhood. And with this stitch you can easily embroider any contours or add writings to your textiles. To make sure here that the stitch outcome is regular, you have to take care that the yarn loop is always directing to the same direction. This is why you see me here putting the loop always upwards. This also helps preventing any tangles. I've noticed in hindsight that probably I would have made this embroidery from left to right, and I would have held the fabric in another way, but probably the embroidery hoop confused me a little bit here. Anyways, the technique is the same. Just find out for yourself your favorite way to hold the fabric when embroidering. Then at last I've decided to add a small bee embroidery. And for the bee, I've drawn on the body and 2 wings. The bee is more or less a combination of the previous embroidery stitches. I'm starting for the body in yellow and I'm filling it with a similar stitch like the leaf, but these stitches are only parallel to each other without a center, of course, like the leaves have it. I just went ahead until the whole body shape was filled up. Then I made 2 stripes in black, leaving a small yellow part at both ends of the bee. Here you have to make sure that all the yellow and the black stripes are equally wide. Then with the same black embroidery thread, you can add now a notch stitch for the eye of the bee. And at last I'm adding the 2 wings with an off-white embroidery thread with the same embroidery stitch I've used for the flowers. This tiny bee is so cute in my embroidery, but just imagine you could also add this in your mending work, for example to cover stains or after closing holes in fabrics. But just as a side note, here on my stable fabric, it was okay to do it like this, but I've seen people adding an embroidery foil for embroidering on jersey fabrics or knit fabrics for more stability in the embroidery hoop. I haven't done this yet, but it seemed quite important to me. With the embroidery now, the cuff is held in place at the sleeve center, but I also wanted to fix it at the sleeve seam, so there I'm just placing some short bar tacks with the sewing machine. Due to my sweaty hands there wasn't much left, but at the end I erased the aqua pen with some water and then the dress itself was ready. The only thing I will do later is to let it soak in water with some vinegar to lock in the dye into the fabric. But this I'll do after the photo shooting.
Just quickly another detail from my whole outfit, from the photos, from the photo shooting. As you probably have seen, I've added skirt hikes to my back belt, and these I wanted to show you quickly. But these are really very simple. Basically, you only need a loop to add it on your belt and to attach 2 D-rings or rings at the bottom, where you can attach the skirt later. The leather I've again cut out of my old handbag, so this is well used now. And to cover the seams, I've added 2 metal sequins here. Of these skirt hikes, I've made 2, and they can be attached at the belt, like this. Okay, that's it. That was my Rosemary Leah dress with the hacked details. I hope you've enjoyed the sewing project. If you've got any questions about it, of course you can write me to info@Koba.Siani.com and I'll be here to help you. Or we can chat in the comments. Before you leave now, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to my channel so that you won't miss any other creative project from my side. Okay, have a great day. We'll see each other to my next sewing video, hopefully. Take care until then. Bye!